Autumn Harris had just transferred to Cedar Ridge High School, a sprawling brick campus nestled in the affluent outskirts of Northern Virginia. She came from Baltimore, where sidewalks were cracked and the schools taught toughness as much as textbooks. She'd once been a rising star in youth judo, nimble, disciplined, undefeated in her weight class. But none of that mattered now, not after the crash, not after she woke up in a hospital bed to the words spinal trauma and partial paralysis. Now she moved through the world in a wheelchair. Her medals gathered dust, her silence deepened. And in this new school, with its polished floors and perfect smiles, she wasn't seen as strong. She was just the black girl with wheels. And some of the students, especially the boys in varsity jackets, saw her as an easy target. What they didn't know was that they weren't just underestimating a girl in recovery. They were provoking a fighter, and fighters never forget. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. 6 months had passed since the accident. A delivery van had swerved into the wrong lane on I-95, colliding with her mother's car at 63 miles per hour. Autumn didn't remember the impact, just the sound of screeching tires and then the silence that followed. She had woken up 2 days later, surrounded by monitors, her father's hands gripping hers, her mother blinking back tears. The doctors said she'd never walk again. Autumn didn't cry. She nodded. She listened. And quietly she began planning. Her father, Colonel David Harris, had retired early from the U.S. Army to help care for her. Their garage was transformed into a makeshift rehab gym, complete with parallel bars, wall mirrors, padded floors, and motivational quotes taped above the door like military mantras. Discipline is stronger than pain. Adapt. Overcome. Autumn trained in silence. She didn't complain, not when her arms ached from pushing weights, not when she fell sideways during standing drills. She was rebuilding herself, bone by bone, muscle by muscle, inch by inch. And when her mother suggested she try enrolling in a new school for her senior year, one that was cleaner, better funded, and more supportive, Autumn agreed. What she didn't say was that she had a plan. What she didn't say was that this school would be her battlefield. Cedar Ridge was everything her old school wasn't. Gleaming white hallways, posters about inclusivity, students with car keys dangling from their designer backpacks. Her first day felt more like entering a country club than a high school. Teachers smiled too brightly. Guidance counselors offered pamphlets on adjusting with dignity. But beneath the surface, the cracks showed. There were stairs, long, sideways ones. Whispers just loud enough to hear. Boys nudging each other when she passed. Girls avoiding eye contact. And then came the varsity football boys. Chase Donovan was their golden boy. Quarterback since sophomore year. Bright future, full scholarship, coach's favorite. He had a smirk that seemed carved into his face and the kind of confidence that only came from a lifetime of never being told no. His friends Brent and Logan followed him like shadows, laughing at his jokes, echoing his taunts. They cornered Autumn by the vending machines on day 3. Chase looked at her chair like it was a novelty toy. "That thing got a turbo button?" he joked, his voice loud enough to draw laughter from passing students. Autumn didn't respond. She looked him in the eyes and then she rolled away. But it didn't stop. Not that week, not the one after. They left sticky notes on her locker that said, "Speed Racer." They imitated wheelchair noises when she entered the cafeteria. Once, Brent, accidentally, dropped a soda can in front of her wheels, splashing her jeans. Nobody stepped in, nobody said a word. And Autumn stayed silent. Because she was watching, memorizing, calculating. And then one afternoon, it escalated. In the parking lot behind the school, Chase and his boys surrounded her. "Ever ridden in one of these?" Chase asked, grabbing the handles of her chair. "Let's see what it can do." Before Autumn could stop him, he yanked her backward. Her body hit the pavement with a dull thud. The wind left her lungs. Laughter erupted. Phones came out. She lay there, back against cold asphalt, arms scraped, face hot with humiliation, as Chase spun donuts in her chair like it was a go-kart. A freshman boy clapped. Someone shouted, "She's faking it anyway." And still, Autumn didn't scream. She didn't cry. She watched. Because fighters don't break in front of enemies. They wait, they train, and when the time is right, they rise. The morning after the parking lot incident, Autumn Harris rolled into Cedar Ridge High with her shoulders squared and her jaw set. Her elbow was bruised, her hip sore, and her pride scraped thin. But her eyes burned with something new. Not anger, not fear, focus. Still, her silence, calculated, razor-sharp, was mistaken for weakness. The boys didn't speak of the wheelchair joyride in front of adults, but in the halls, in the cafeteria, and out on the bleachers it became their favorite private joke. Chase Donovan wore it like a trophy. Brent and Logan retold the story with growing flair. "She just laid there. I think she liked it. Dude, you should have seen her face." No one stepped in. And that, Autumn would later say, was worse than the bullying itself. The problem wasn't just the boys, it was the entire school culture. The airtight silence of the bystanders, the willful blindness of teachers, and the well-practiced indifference of administrators. Take Vice Principal Rick Johnson, for example. A tall, balding man who wore loafers with tassels and considered himself firm but fair. When Autumn finally mustered the nerve to report what had happened, he'd leaned back in his leather chair, sighed, and said, "Teenage boys can be thoughtless, Miss Harris. What you're describing doesn't sound like harassment. Sounds like a prank gone a little too far." "A prank?" Autumn had said, her voice calm but cracking. "They dragged me out of my chair." "Were you physically harmed?" he asked, peering at her over the rims of his glasses. She hesitated. "No broken bones, no," she admitted. "There you go. And unless we have adult witnesses or video evidence, it's really your word against theirs." He offered her a brochure titled Conflict Resolution and Positive Peer Interaction. She took it without a word, wheeled herself out of the office, and tore it in half behind the vending machine. By the third week of school, the campaign against her had taken on a life of its own. The boys had learned to weaponize subtlety. No more shouting, no more obvious pranks. Instead, they deployed what Autumn would later call surgical cruelty. Each encounter was just plausible enough to pass as coincidence. Logan would accidentally block the ramp when the hallway was crowded. Brent would drop his backpack in the exact middle of the wheelchair path. Chase would make loud, sarcastic remarks. "Better clear the runway. Autumn's coming in for landing," followed by chuckles from nearby athletes who high-fived him like he'd just scored a touchdown. And still, no one intervened. Teachers looked away. Students smirked. Guidance counselors offered yoga flyers and mental health checklists, but never once asked the right questions. Autumn could feel herself being erased. It was like she existed solely to be tested. Maya Rivera, her only real friend, walked with her most days. Maya had transferred from Sacramento the same week Autumn arrived and knew something about feeling like an outsider. She was bold, sarcastic, and fiercely loyal. But even Maya, for all her fire, had limits. "They're not stupid," Maya said as they sat in the library one afternoon. "They know exactly how far they can go before it counts as bullying. They're playing the system like a fiddle." "The system doesn't care," Autumn replied. That Friday, things took a darker turn. Autumn had been maneuvering toward her chemistry class when she turned a corner and found Chase standing directly in her path. He wasn't smiling this time. "What now?" she asked. He stepped aside, but just barely. "Just making sure the lanes are clear for our special guest," he said with mock politeness. His voice was quiet but carried a deliberate weight. "Wouldn't want another accident." There was a pause. A few students nearby glanced over, unsure whether to laugh. Autumn's hand tightened on her wheel. "You mean the one where you dragged me out of my chair?" she said coldly. Chase blinked. The edge of a smile returned to his lips. "You should really let that go. People are starting to think you're fragile." She rolled past without another word, but her pulse thundered in her ears. Later that night, she would repeat his words to her father during their therapy session in the garage. "You're stronger than him in every way that matters," Colonel Harris said, adjusting the resistance bands. "Then why does he keep winning?" Autumn asked quietly. Her father had no answer. By mid-October, the harassment had evolved again. Now, it wasn't just physical obstruction or verbal jabs, it was psychological warfare. Notes in her locker that read, "Broken things should stay in the shop." Her picture photocopied and taped to the wall next to a handicap parking symbol. Even a fake social media profile, mocking her wheelchair with memes and jokes too cruel to repeat. Autumn documented what she could. Screenshots, photos, time-stamped messages. She brought it to Vice Principal Johnson again. He glanced at her folder, flipped through it, and sighed. "Miss Harris, you're clearly under a lot of stress, but some of these things could have come from anyone. Unless you have direct proof that Chase or his friends made these accounts, they're using school Wi-Fi. You can trace IPs. That's a matter for IT, and I'm not sure that kind of escalation is necessary. We don't want to start a witch hunt." Autumn stared at him. "May I go?" she asked. Johnson looked relieved. "Of course, and remember, my door's always open." Autumn rolled out without a word. That afternoon, she stopped by the janitor's supply closet and asked if she could borrow a mirror. "Just one of those little handheld ones," she told him. "For a project." The next morning, she installed it under the tray of her wheelchair, angled just enough to let her see behind her at all times. "You're paranoid," Maya said when she noticed. "No," Autumn replied. "I'm prepared." That same week, the school hosted its annual homecoming pep rally. Autumn hadn't planned to attend, but Maya insisted. "You shouldn't hide," Maya said. "You didn't do anything wrong." The gymnasium buzzed with the electric hum of teenage chaos. Balloons, cheerleaders, confetti guns, rap music thundering through the loudspeakers. The football team ran out in matching jerseys, Chase in the lead, high-fiving the crowd like a hero returning from war. Autumn stayed at the edge of the bleachers watching. Then she noticed something. 3 rows up, Brent was holding his phone, angled carefully, pointed at her. He nudged Logan. Both of them laughed. Maya followed her gaze. "What are they? Oh no, are they filming you?" Autumn didn't move. "I've had enough," she said softly. That night, she didn't go home. She went to the garage. Her father was already there, stretching. "You're early," he said. "I'm ready," she answered. Ready for what comes next. Colonel Harris studied her face. Something had changed. Her eyes didn't just burn with anger. They glowed with resolve. He nodded once. "Then show me." For the next hour, they trained in silence. Not physical therapy, combat prep, balance, core control, low stances, grip reversals. Autumn was still weak in the lower body. but her upper body was a fortress. Her reflexes had returned. Her arms were fast, her shoulders anchored. After a particularly fierce drill, she looked at her father and said, "I want to be able to stand long enough to hold them off. 1 minute, maybe 2. That's dangerous," he warned. So is silence. By November, the weather had turned. Leaves skittered across the parking lot like whispers of something coming. The boys had grown bolder, but Autumn's silence wasn't submission anymore. It was strategy. Every snide comment was filed away. Every shove, every accident, every laugh behind her back, it was all fuel. And she was almost ready. What Chase and his friends failed to realize, what the school refused to see, was that their games were no longer breaking her down. They were sharpening her. The day after the pep rally, Autumn didn't speak at all. Not to Maya, not to her parents, not to anyone. She moved through her Saturday morning routine, wheeling herself to the bathroom, brushing her teeth with quiet determination, adjusting her balance to reach the higher shelf in the pantry, without a single word. Not because there was nothing to say, but because if she opened her mouth, the rage might pour out like broken glass. It wasn't the camera that did it. It wasn't the whispers or the social media posts or even the physical humiliation. It was the way they enjoyed it. It was the way Chase laughed after mocking her to an entire gymnasium full of students. The way Logan smirked when she passed in the hallway. The way Vice Principal Johnson said, "Let it go," like her pain was a wrinkle on a clean shirt. Annoying, but not worth ironing out. Autumn felt herself coming apart. Not in the way people assumed, not in some teenage emotional collapse. No, it was deeper. A spiritual unraveling. A gnawing contradiction that made her question everything she'd been taught about strength, about patience, about waiting for justice. Her father had always told her, "You don't swing until the other guy throws the first punch." Her mother had said, "Let the system work." Truth always floats to the top. But what if the system was the one holding her down? What if the other guy had been punching all along, but using words, smirks, and silence instead of fists? That afternoon, Colonel Harris found her in the garage, gripping the parallel bars, sweat pooling at her collarbone, her arms trembling as she tried to hold herself upright for just 1 more second. "Again," she whispered. "You've done 3 reps," he said softly. "Let's give your muscles time to recover. Again." He didn't argue. He simply stood by with his stopwatch as she pulled herself up once more, locked her elbows and stared into the mirror. The girl in the reflection didn't look broken. She looked furious. 17 seconds, he called out. She didn't move. 24, still holding. 32. Her arms started to tremble, a deep vibration in the muscles just beneath the skin. 40. "Keep going," she hissed. Her voice was strained, but her gaze never left the mirror. 57 seconds. Autumn. Her arms gave out. She crumpled back into the chair, gasping, sweat dripping from her brow. He handed her a towel. 57's impressive, but you can't grind your way to healing. Autumn wiped her face, then threw the towel across the room. "I'm not trying to heal anymore," she snapped. "I'm trying to get ready." For what? She looked at him. And for the first time since the accident, he saw something in her face that scared him more than her injuries ever had. Clarity. Cold, hard clarity. "For them to cross the line again," she said. "Because the next time they do, I won't be on the ground." He was silent for a long time. Then he walked over and sat beside her. His voice, when it came, was low and steady. "Autumn, if you're training to hurt them, you're not training like a warrior. You're training like someone with a grudge." Her lip curled. "You trained soldiers to neutralize enemies. What's the difference?" I trained soldiers to protect the innocent, not to feed vengeance." Autumn turned her chair away. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You're stronger than them, but strength isn't always about fists. It's about choosing when to use them." She didn't answer, because part of her, maybe a large part, wasn't interested in choosing. She wanted them to suffer. Sunday was colder than usual. A thin frost layered the car windshields in the driveway. Autumn sat at the kitchen table in her hoodie and gloves, staring out the window with her untouched oatmeal going cold. Her mother placed a hand over hers. "Honey, talk to us, please. There's nothing to say." "You're disappearing," Nia Harris said, her voice breaking. "You're pulling into yourself again, like after the surgery. But this time, you're not healing, you're hardening." Autumn looked at her. "Maybe I have to." Her mother swallowed, blinking back tears. Later that night, Autumn opened the laptop her aunt had given her after the accident. She typed in "cognitive control during trauma recovery," and then changed it to rage and paralysis. The articles that came up ranged from clinical psychology papers to personal blogs written by people who had lost the use of their legs in war, car crashes, falls. They all spoke of one thing: the fight between acceptance and defiance. Autumn didn't want either. She didn't want to accept that she had to live in fear, but she didn't want to become the kind of person who lived in rage either. She shut the laptop and sat in the dark. Monday morning, the hallways felt louder than usual. Or maybe her ears were more alert. Every locker slam echoed like a gunshot. Every group laugh felt like it might be about her. She rolled toward her locker, watching the reflections in the linoleum as much as the people ahead. She'd memorized the tricks now. Brent liked to stand near corners. Logan liked to pretend he hadn't seen her until the last second. Chase didn't need to pretend anything. He moved like the whole school was built to orbit him. As she reached her locker, she noticed something taped to it. A cartoon. Crude. Black and white. A stick figure in a wheelchair holding a stop sign. Below it, in red marker: "If you don't like the traffic, stay off the road." She stared at it for a long time. Then slowly, deliberately, she peeled it off, folded it 4 times and placed it inside her binder. "I hope you're keeping all of that," Maya whispered beside her. "Every scrap." The bell rang. They started toward chemistry class. Halfway there, Maya stopped. "What?" Autumn looked up. Chase stood at the end of the hallway, leaning casually against the wall, watching. Autumn wheeled forward. As she passed him, he leaned in close, just enough for her to hear. "Get ready for Thursday," he said. "We've got something special planned." She didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't look at him. But inside, the clock started ticking. That evening, she asked her father to teach her joint locks. He hesitated. "That's real combat. I know. And you're still recovering." "I won't do anything stupid," she said, "but I won't be helpless again either." They trained late into the night. Her mother watched from the window, her arms crossed, her mouth set in a tight line. Afterward, Autumn sat on her bed in the dark, her muscles aching, her palms bruised from the floor mats. She thought of the mirror. She thought of that cartoon on her locker, and she whispered aloud to no one but herself, "I don't want revenge. I want the truth to hurt." By Wednesday, the anxiety had become physical. Her back tightened, her stomach fluttered, but her focus stayed locked. Thursday was coming. And when it did, so would they, and this time, the girl they thought they knew wouldn't be there. The sky was already streaking orange when Autumn wheeled out of the debate room Thursday afternoon. The meeting had run late. The faculty sponsor lost track of time, and by the time she and Maya stepped into the parking lot, most students had already gone. The distant clang of lockers and a gust of wind rustling the flagpole ropes were the only sounds. Autumn knew the lot would be mostly empty. She had mapped it all out. She knew the visibility zones, the blind spots, the rows without cameras. She knew Chase Donovan's habits, how he parked in the back row, away from staff, how he always loitered after school on Thursdays. What she didn't know, what she had feared, was whether he would actually do it. Maya slung her backpack over her shoulder and pushed the key fob. Her Honda Civic beeped twice, headlights flashing across the asphalt. "That's weird," Maya murmured, slowing her pace. Autumn followed her gaze. 3 figures stood beside the Civic. Chase, Brent, Logan, just like she'd imagined. No masks, no attempt to hide. They didn't need to, because they never had consequences. "Let's go back inside," Maya whispered, her voice suddenly small. "No," Autumn replied, her voice steady. "I'm done hiding." They continued walking, silent but alert. Autumn's pulse was steady. Her hands, however, gripped the push rims tighter than usual. Her fingers itched, not with fear but with focus, like the moment before a tournament match when the world narrowed to the mat. Chase was the first to speak. "Well, well," he said, smiling, like this was a game. "Just in time for the show." "We're not in the mood," Maya snapped, moving to stand between him and Autumn. "Walk away." Chase ignored her. Instead, he moved toward Autumn's wheelchair and bent slightly, too close. "Let me guess," he said, voice low. "You've been training, right? Getting stronger? That's what the little garage gym is for?" Autumn didn't answer. "But here's the thing, Princess," he continued. "Strength only matters if you can use it. And right now," his hands gripped the wheelchair handles, "you're still sitting down." She reacted instantly. "Don't touch me." Her voice was sharp, clear, a warning, but he didn't listen. He yanked the chair back violently, pulling her entire body with it. The world tilted. Her left shoulder hit first, then her hip. Her breath left her body in a rush as the cold pavement met her spine. Maya screamed, "Chase, stop!" But he was already laughing. "You always wondered what it's like," Brent said, climbing into the chair and popping a small wheelie. "Hey, Logan, get this on video," Chase said, tossing him a phone. Autumn lay there, arms pinned beneath her, the pavement like ice through her jeans. The pain wasn't sharp, it was heavy, dull, familiar, but the shame was something else entirely. She heard Maya trying to reach her, heard Brent circling in the wheelchair, mocking her with slow turns and exaggerated arm pumps. "Yo, this is actually kind of fun," Brent called out, snickering. "No wonder you never get out of it." Autumn rolled to her side. Grit scraped her palms. Blood was in her mouth. She must have bitten her cheek. And still, no one came. Teachers had gone home. The security guard was likely on his hourly patrol. They had chosen this time perfectly. They had waited for her to be alone. "You're going to break it," Maya shouted. "She needs that." "It's just a chair," Chase said, spinning it on one wheel. "I'm sure her insurance covers the deluxe model." Maya stepped forward again, but Logan intercepted her. "Back off. We're just messing around." Autumn sat up slowly. Her shoulder ached, her wrist throbbed, but her mind was clear. Razor clear. She looked up, and something changed in the air. The boys didn't notice it at first. Not until she placed her hands flat on the ground. Not until she pushed up, one movement at a time. Not until she stood. Brent was the first to stop laughing. Logan looked stunned. Chase turned slowly, like he couldn't believe his eyes. Autumn was upright. Wobbling, yes, but standing. "You've been faking it?" Logan blurted out. Autumn shook her head. I've been recovering." Her voice didn't tremble. She stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. Chase moved toward her with forced bravado. "You don't scare me." "No?" she asked. "Then why are your hands shaking?" He lunged, but she was ready. Her body was slow, but her mind was 3 moves ahead. She stepped aside as he reached out. His hand caught nothing but air. She pivoted, just as she had practiced with her father, and swept her arm up against his shoulder. Off balance, he stumbled, caught himself, turned red. "You little—" He charged again. This time, she let him come. She grabbed his arm mid-lunge, spun under it, and shoved his back with both hands. He toppled forward, landing on his hands and knees. His pride hit harder than his body. "You want to play rough?" Logan snapped, stepping forward. Autumn's breathing was steady. "You're outnumbered," Brent said, circling her. She turned, kept her back to no one, her posture low, her feet firm. "You came here for a show," she said quietly. "Now you've got one." Logan rushed first, a wild, untrained tackle. She dodged, ducked, and drove her elbow into his ribs. He groaned, falling to his knees. Chase scrambled to his feet, red-faced and raging. Brent flanked her right. 2 at once. But Autumn didn't panic. She spun, grabbed Brent's hoodie, pulled him forward, using his momentum against him. He landed hard on the pavement, gasping. Chase hesitated, and that's when she saw it. The fear, real fear. "You think you've won?" he spat. "You think this changes anything?" "No," Autumn said. "I know it does." Sirens echoed in the distance. Maya, her hands shaking, had finally hit the emergency call. "I've got it all on video," she whispered. "Every second." The boys froze. Autumn turned her back to them, confident, controlled. Maya helped her back into the wheelchair. The seat felt different now, not like a prison, but a choice. The police arrived minutes later, then a teacher, then the vice principal. But by then the damage was done. Not to Autumn, to them, to the illusion of untouchability, to the lie that bullies never fall. As they led the boys to the office, Autumn sat quietly in her chair, hands folded in her lap. The breeze caught her hair. The fading sunlight washed the parking lot in gold. And for the first time since the accident, she smiled. Not because the fight was over, but because it had finally begun. The Monday after the incident, the halls of Cedar Ridge High School buzzed with a different kind of energy. Not the carefree murmur of students between classes or the shallow gossip of Friday night parties, but something colder, quieter. Like a storm had passed, and no one quite knew what damage had been left behind. Everyone had seen the video by now. Maya's footage had circulated in every group chat within hours. Uploaded anonymously to a student-run social justice page, it showed everything. The taunts, the wheelchair theft, the slam onto the asphalt, and most importantly, Autumn Harris standing, defending herself, taking down all 3 boys in under 2 minutes. By Sunday morning, it had over 8,000 views. By Monday, it had reached local news. Principal Hayes had summoned the district superintendent before first bell. And Vice Principal Rick Johnson? He was nowhere to be seen. Autumn wheeled through the main hallway at 7:45 a.m. sharp. Her palms were wrapped in soft athletic tape, her hoodie sleeves pushed up to reveal the bruises blooming at her elbows and wrists, but her posture unshaken. Students parted for her like water around a stone. Some stared in awe. Others looked down, ashamed. A few nodded quietly, acknowledging something they didn't have the words for yet. She stopped by her locker. Maya stood next to her, not saying much. She didn't need to. Autumn glanced across the hallway and saw them. Chase, Brent, Logan. All 3 leaning against the wall like usual, but not quite like usual. Chase had a bandage across his left brow. Logan's ribs were taped, visible beneath his loosened hoodie. Brent's arm was in a sling. But that wasn't what caught her attention. It was the way they looked at her now. Not like a target, not even like a threat, like a reckoning. Autumn didn't blink. She closed her locker, spun her chair toward them, and rolled straight across the hallway, cutting through the silence like a blade. Chase straightened. "You've made your point," he said, voice low, forced calm. Autumn stopped just short of bumping his shoes with her wheels. "I haven't even started," she replied. Brent shifted uncomfortably. Logan looked down at the floor. "Look," Chase began, trying to regain footing. "This whole thing's gotten way out of hand. Nobody meant for it to go that far. We were just messing around." Autumn's voice was soft, controlled. "You dragged me from my chair and laughed while I hit the pavement. It wasn't. You spun donuts in my only mode of transportation like it was a toy," she continued, her tone never rising, but every word cutting like glass. "And when I said no, you didn't stop. That's not a prank, Chase, that's assault." A crowd was forming now, students slowing their steps, a teacher peering through her classroom window. Maya pulled out her phone but didn't record. She didn't need to. Autumn had the room. "And what do you want?" Chase snapped, his anger slipping through the cracks. "A medal? A parade? You think this makes you a hero?" Autumn tilted her head. "Number. But it makes you what you've always been, a coward." The hallway fell utterly still. "You only feel strong when your target can't fight back," she said. "But what happens now that I can?" Chase opened his mouth, but no sound came. Autumn leaned in, her voice just for him now. "You thought I'd stay in that chair forever, thought I'd stay quiet, thought my silence was weakness. But silence isn't surrender, Chase. Sometimes it's just waiting for the right moment." With that, she turned and rolled away. Maya followed. Behind them, Chase didn't move. Later that day, Principal Hayes called a school-wide assembly. It was rare. The last one had been for a bomb threat 2 years ago. The gymnasium filled slowly, students whispering, teachers scanning for phones and earbuds. A local reporter from Channel 8 sat quietly near the back, flanked by 2 members of the school board. Autumn sat front row, flanked by Maya and Miss Rodriguez, her English teacher, the only adult who had believed her from the start. Principal Hayes stepped to the microphone. His expression was grave. "As many of you are aware, a serious incident occurred on school grounds late last week. That incident involved targeted harassment, physical assault, and a student who showed more courage than most of us could ever comprehend." Whispers rose, then died. Hayes continued, "Let me be clear. Cedar Ridge has failed. We failed to listen. We failed to protect. We failed to enforce our own policies. That ends today." A small murmur of surprise. Hayes turned slightly toward the school board members. "Effective immediately, Vice Principal Rick Johnson has been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into misconduct and negligence. Additionally, a full review of our harassment protocols is underway. This school will no longer ignore the cries of its students, especially those made most vulnerable." He took a breath. His next words were slower. Personal. "I want to offer my deepest apology to Autumn Harris. Not just for what happened, but for what didn't. For every warning we brushed aside. For every report we buried. For every time you were told to move on. You didn't just survive what they did. You exposed the cracks in our system." Autumn felt Maya reach for her hand, but she didn't cry. She sat straighter, finally seen, finally heard. Hayes closed his folder. "Autumn, would you like to say a few words?" Gasps rippled through the gym. Autumn paused, then nodded. She wheeled herself to the podium, cleared her throat. "I didn't come here today to relive what happened," she said. "You've all seen it. Most of you watched it from your phones over the weekend like it was entertainment." Silence. "But what happened to me isn't the story. The story is what happened after. When the adults ignored it. When classmates looked away. When I was told to be quiet, be patient, be polite, even while I was being humiliated." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I want you to ask yourselves one question. If I hadn't stood up, literally, would any of this have changed?" Eyes darted around the room. "I'm not the only student who's been targeted. I'm just the one who had a camera on her when it happened. There are others. You sit next to them. You laugh at the jokes made about them, or worse, you stay silent." Now her voice trembled, not with weakness but with conviction. "That silence ends now, not just mine, all of ours." She stepped back. The applause was slow, tentative, then it rose like a wave. And Autumn, for the first time since the accident, smiled openly. Not because she had won, but because she had changed something bigger than herself. The aftermath was swift. Brent, Logan, and Chase were suspended pending district hearings. Police opened an investigation. Rick Johnson quietly submitted his resignation the next week. But what lingered most wasn't the punishment. It was the shift. Teachers stopped ignoring small cruelties. Students began calling out microaggressions in real time. Posters for a new student advocacy board went up across campus, led by none other than Ms. Rodriguez, now promoted to interim vice principal. And Autumn, she walked unaided, twice a week down the science wing. Each step slow, painful, but every step hers. It didn't happen all at once. Justice never did. It came in pieces. First as murmurs in administrative hallways, then as official memos, board meetings, press calls, and finally, policy. But the moment that changed everything, that came quietly. At 8:47 a.m. on a gray Friday, Autumn Harris sat beside her parents in the Cedar Ridge Unified School Board chambers. The room smelled like fresh carpet glue and overbrewed coffee. Rows of chairs were filled with parents, teachers, 2 local reporters, and a growing contingent of students holding small printed signs that read, "We believe her." Silence is not neutral. Protect disabled students. Principal Hayes stood before the microphone. His voice was calm, firm, and without apology. After reviewing the video footage, the documented history of complaints, and the administration's repeated failure to act, I recommend the immediate expulsion of students Chase Donovan, Brent Kirkland, and Logan Walsh for conduct unbecoming, targeted harassment, and violation of the student code of ethics. There was no shouting. No grand gesture, just the quiet weight of accountability, finally spoken aloud in a room where it could no longer be ignored. Autumn didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She watched as the vote was called, unanimous, 7-0, and the resolution passed. Chase and his friends were officially expelled. A motion to refer their actions to the local district attorney's office passed moments later. The room buzzed like a beehive, but Autumn's world had narrowed to the rhythmic sound of her mother's breathing beside her, and her father's strong hand resting on her shoulder. Not victory, something deeper. Validation. The days that followed were a blur. First, the story was picked up by Channel 8, then the Washington Tribune, and by the following Tuesday a segment titled "Courage in the Classroom," a teen's stand against bullying, aired on national morning television. Autumn's face was suddenly everywhere, on the school homepage, local advocacy websites, and in inboxes of disability rights organizations across the country. Her inbox filled with interview requests, scholarship inquiries, and letters from complete strangers. Some were from other students, others from parents, teachers, veterans. One message stood out. A handwritten letter from an 8th-grade girl in Milwaukee read, "I used to hide in the bathroom during lunch. After I saw your video, I asked to speak at my school board meeting. Thank you for reminding me I'm not broken." Autumn read it 3 times before folding it neatly and placing it in the top drawer of her desk. Her mother, Nia, watched her carefully those days, worried about the weight of unwanted celebrity, worried that Autumn's trauma was becoming a spectacle. But Autumn was not unraveling. She was becoming. At school, things didn't go back to normal, because normal had never been good enough. In Miss Rodriguez's English class, desks were rearranged to make space for wheelchairs in every row, not just the back. Teachers were retrained on accessibility protocols. A new anti-harassment hotline was launched and monitored anonymously by a third-party firm. Miss Rodriguez, now Vice Principal Rodriguez, walked the halls like a hawk with purpose, speaking softly but acting decisively. She had learned the hard way what ignoring the quiet students could cost. One afternoon, she asked Autumn to stay after class. "I need your help," she said plainly. Autumn raised an eyebrow. "We're starting a student-led initiative, peer advocacy, conflict training, disability inclusion workshops. I want you on the board." Autumn hesitated. "I'm not an activist." "Maybe not," Rodriguez said with a smile. "But you're a survivor, and sometimes survivors make the best leaders, not because they want the spotlight, but because they know what it's like to be in the dark." Autumn agreed quietly. But that night she stood in front of her mirror and said the word aloud for the first time, "leader." It felt like wearing a new jacket, unfamiliar, but not unearned. The legal case moved forward quietly. Through attorney correspondence, Autumn's family learned that Chase Donovan's family had tried to suppress the video evidence. Their lawyer argued that the confrontation was mutual combat, ignoring the months of documented harassment. But the footage was too damning, too public. With media attention, there would be no quiet settlements. A formal charge of juvenile assault was filed against all 3 boys. Autumn was offered the opportunity to make a victim impact statement. "I want to," she told her parents. Her father, who had once fought her instinct to strike back, nodded without protest. The man who had taught her to defend herself now understood that justice wasn't about fists. It was about truth. At the courthouse 2 weeks later, Autumn read her statement under oath. "I don't stand here today because I want revenge," she said, her voice steady. "I stand here because I want it to stop. For every student who watches their bullies laugh while adults look away, for every girl who's told to be patient, for every kid in a wheelchair who's told to lower their expectations." The courtroom was silent. Even the boys' parents, once smug, defensive, looked down. Chase never looked at her. That, she decided, was his punishment. To know he'd lost not just the fight, but the lie he'd wrapped himself in. By mid-December, the first snow-dusted Cedar Ridge's parking lot. Autumn wheeled herself to the school entrance alone. Her strength nearly restored, but her identity transformed. The security guard greeted her with a respectful nod. Teachers paused to say good morning. Students didn't avoid her anymore. They looked her in the eye. Some even joined the advocacy program. The air felt cleaner, more awake. That week, Principal Hayes announced sweeping district-wide reforms, mandatory bias training for staff, redesigned accessibility in all buildings by fall, and an annual student summit on inclusion. Autumn's name was printed on the bottom of the press release. She didn't ask for that, but she didn't mind not anymore. At home, life slowly adjusted. The garage gym was still there, but now it held something new. A framed photo of Autumn at the school board podium, hands steady on the mic. Her father hung it beside his military commendation. When asked, he'd just say, "That's my girl. That's the one who won the war." One evening, a package arrived in the mail, no return address. Inside was a medal, real, weighty bronze, and a simple note. For valor. Her mother cried when she saw it. Autumn didn't, she smiled, and placed it in her desk beside the letter from the girl in Milwaukee. By winter break, Autumn was walking again. Not for long stretches, just across the kitchen, or from the garage to the mailbox, but with pride. She still used the chair for long distances, and she didn't hide it. She owned it. When the reporter from Channel 7 arrived for the follow-up interview, she asked, "What changed for you after all of this?" Autumn paused, thoughtful. "Everything," she said, "but most of all, I finally believed that my voice could move people, and when one voice speaks up, it makes room for others." The piece aired Christmas Eve. That night, as snow fell softly outside the window, Autumn sat with her parents by the fireplace, flipping through letters she'd received from other students across the country. 52 letters, 52 lives, some from wheelchairs, some from foster homes, some from places far harder than Cedar Ridge, all of them echoing the same truth. Because of you, I spoke up. Justice had come. Late, painfully, unevenly, but it had come, and with it, something more powerful. Change. By spring, the halls of Cedar Ridge looked the same, but they felt different. The silence that once followed Autumn like a shadow had been replaced with nods of respect, soft greetings, and something rarer in a high school, accountability. What had begun as humiliation in a cold parking lot had ignited a movement stretching far beyond those walls. Autumn had not set out to become a symbol, but sometimes the ones who never seek the spotlight cast the brightest light. She now walked the halls when her strength allowed, with her head high and her wheels quiet. The chair was no longer a symbol of limitation. It was a badge of survival. But the biggest change wasn't in her legs, it was in her voice. Autumn had spoken not just for herself, but for every young person told to endure in silence. She'd proven that dignity doesn't come from standing tall, but from refusing to kneel before injustice. She taught them that power doesn't belong to the loudest, the strongest, or the most privileged. It belongs to the one who refuses to be broken. Her classmates began to understand that true strength isn't how hard you hit, but how deeply you care. Teachers listened better. Administrators responded faster. The school didn't just punish cruelty. It redefined what kindness could look like. But the real outcome, the one no camera could fully capture, was this. Autumn Harris gave others permission to fight their own battles with grace, to speak without apology, to rise when the world expected them to stay down. Justice, in the end, wasn't just delivered. It echoed. Have you ever witnessed quiet courage change everything around it? Autumn's journey reminds us that true power often comes not from strength alone, but from standing up, especially when the world wants you to stay silent. What does your stand-up moment look like? Share it in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that empower, inspire, and bring light to voices that matter. Your voice could be the spark someone else is waiting for. Let's keep this movement growing. Together.